Hey everyone, Ryan and David from Sunday Sounds here. Today we're going to be talking about why worship keys players in 2019 are feeling left behind. This is a pretty big topic, and I think it's something that a lot of worship leaders and worship keys players have experienced or dealt with, maybe volunteers on your team. And I really do, I've experienced it personally myself, where keys players feel disempowered, or like the rest of the band, or maybe just worship music in general, is sort of moving past them or moving ahead further than they are. Ryan, is this something that you've seen or experienced yourself?
Definitely, especially with all the new software keys rigs and all the new variables that have come about within the last few years.
So let's break this down. Like, when did this start becoming a thing?
Well, it's sort of, to me, it's all about the context of whenever I think of a keyboard, it immediately triggers like, oh, a piano. And you're used to just really those piano sounds coming out of a piano.
Right.
But yeah, you start to hear things like pads and even some of those synth lines, and it's just not normal to imagine that sound coming out of a piano. So anything with pads, it goes back really. It seems like maybe we went from kind of piano, and then we started going like, you have some organ layers, and then it became like just pads. And
yeah,
the concept of a pad, I can't remember the first time I heard like what a pad was, but I just knew it was something different.
I think what was sort of weird was there was a while when that shift was sort of happening musically, like on some Hillsong United albums, Hillsong worship albums, even like 10 years ago, where there was more of this like bed underneath that what the keys were providing, but it wasn't prominent enough where people were really like naming it as like, oh, that's something different. It just felt sort of glued together, and that was happening at the same time as these like really aggressive guitar parts. So many people focused entirely on what the guitars were doing that was new, and I feel like the keys part sort of got overlooked.
Yeah.
And then there was a period of time, I think, where a lot of us in the keys world started to figure out, okay, I don't need just a piano, I need a piano and a pad. We're like, this is what I do now, I'm a pad player.
Yep.
I mean, as a worship leader, like I've walked through helping my keys players understand the difference between playing piano and playing like keys. And when I was first doing that, I did a pretty poor job of like, no, just play pads. Like, and I think that's almost a dangerous thing to say, like, just do this.
Yep.
And that's where I feel like we're at here in 2019 with this danger of keys players being left behind, where a lot of worship leaders, I've been guilty of this, say like, no, just play pads. Like, don't play piano, just do something even simpler, like less complicated, less engaging, less creative, less expressive. And it's because, for me, it was because I didn't know what else to tell them to do. I knew I didn't want them to play piano, but I hadn't done the work to figure out what else they could bring to the table. And a lot of keys players that I run into that feel really frustrated or jaded know that there's a lot of cool stuff going on in these songs, especially now. Like, there's so many cool arrangements, so many awesome keys parts, but then they end up just being in the track, or just like, we'll let the guitar cover the lead and you just play pads. And I know that there's a lot of you worship leaders watching who don't do this, and kudos to you for empowering your keys players to actually try and do this stuff live. But it's such a massive shift in preparation, in technology, and in the way that you listen and dissect and figure out what you're gonna do, that I feel like me as a worship leader, I was several years behind navigating that shift. So let's make this actionable, because the point of this video is not doom and gloom to say that keys players are always gonna be unhappy and jaded for the rest of forever. So if you're a worship leader watching, or if you're a keys player who wants to bring this conversation to the people in authority over you, let's lay down a couple concrete actions that people can take. Like, what does a worship leader need to do to equip themselves to help navigate this shift with their keys players? So what's one thing you would say to the worship leader, or one thing that the keys player on the team who is frustrated can bring to their worship leader?
Become familiar with the different types of sounds that are common, and just start to flesh out like different names. So you have your pianos, your E-pianos, your pads, your synth leads. So just start to become familiar with the different varieties of sounds that fit into those categories. That way you can more effectively communicate what type of sound you're after.
Yeah, and understanding that takes time to do that communicating, and it's not, and like during a rehearsal, it's probably not the best time to have that conversation, because It's like vague and philosophical and theoretical. And if you're the keys player and you have ideas about what those things are, bringing them to your worship leader in rehearsal isn't probably the best idea either, because then you're putting them on the spot of communicating clearly with you and of understanding what you're trying to get across. You don't want to seem like you're trying to derail the rehearsal or make it all about you. But if you're the keys player and you want to do that, that's something that you should be proud of, but just bring it in a time when there's actually space set apart for it. The other thing I'll say with terminology and like identifying the different types of sounds is that if you don't know where to go to get that inspiration, to be able to hear a pad or be able to hear what like a worship piano sounds like and why that's different than a piano, like what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like we've got resources and a community of folks that can give you recommendations. So if you're like, hey, I really want to know what a warm pad sounds like, what are some songs that you love that have pads in them? Then like ask in our Facebook group. We'll put a link in the description of this video. You can get just like tons of recommendations for what those different types of sounds are. So that would be the first thing, is like figure out what sounds, what the different names and terminology are. I think that the main thing that I would say that goes on top of that is understand that this takes time and that you don't have to be in a massive hurry. If you can just make one incremental change or level up in the way that you communicate with your keys players, or that you as the keys player communicate with your worship leader, then that can be a game changer right there. So if you're at piano only right now, maybe the change for you is figuring out a way that you can bring a pad into the mix. Or if you've been stuck in pad land for forever and all the cool parts are in the track, if you're the keys player, the next step wouldn't be like no tracks ever again. It would be like, hey, I'm gonna intentionally pick out one part from this song we're doing next week, and I'm gonna talk to my worship leader about it and say, hey, I would really love the chance to try to play that live during rehearsal. Remove all the pressure from yourself and from the people in authority over you to just take a step and see how it feels. And if that goes well, then you can start to talk about like, hey, that went really well. Like maybe we could try that again with another song. Or maybe I can talk to the other keys players on my team about doing that as well and show them how I did it. Or if you're the worship leader, you can carve out time with each of the people that are a part of your team to explain like, hey, this is something that we want to do and here's why. So nailing the terminology down and then figuring out how to make time and space for just incremental growth will make sure that even if you currently feel like you're behind the times, or if you're in that dangerous spot of keys players feeling like they're being left behind by music and the rest of the band, you don't have to stay there, and you also don't have to fix it all overnight.
If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts of maybe a time when you felt like you were being left behind and how you addressed that. Make sure to also like and subscribe so you can stay tuned for all the other content that we put out.
We'd also love to hear from you on what you'd like to see in future conversations like this one. So again, be sure to hit up the comments and let us know what you want us to talk about next. Thanks for watching.